All right, as part of CoolMitt's partnership with USA Cycling, I am super excited to have David Martin here as part of our interview to review everything related to thermoregulation, palmar cooling, as it relates to the world of cycling. David, welcome.
Yeah, hi Jesse. It's great to see you again. So we saw you every single morning for like 4 years solid with the Philadelphia 76ers, and now we'd always talk about cycling a little bit, and now we get to actually come back and talk only about cycling. So I love
That,
it. Nice to see you
that's right.
again.
That's right. Everyone listening should know we shared an office for 4 years, and I enjoyed the moments I enjoyed most was when you got on the whiteboard and just started doing your thing on ideas and execution. And
At
um,
that stage, it was a little more fun than the win-loss record with the Sixers. So that was almost more fun. Yes.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. We'll park that on the sideline for just a second and get into the topic at hand, which
Okay.
is thermoregulation for cycling. First, can you just give everyone just sort of a background, like your direct involvement? Obviously, an incredible career in sports science and exercise physiology and leading high performance teams. But if you can you just tell everybody about your background, what you've done in high performance sport?
Yeah, so academically, I've got a degree in physiology from a small school in Idaho. I got really interested in exercise physiology, so my master's degree is in exercise physiology. I found my way to the U.S. Olympic Training Center after my master's degree. They had these research assistantships, so I was there for about a year and a half as a research assistantship working with physiologists. And that's when I started spending most of my time with cyclists. I raced a little bit. My brother raced, so I was around cycling a bit, but nothing at a high level. So in Colorado Springs is where I kind of met Team USA. That was back in the Chris Carmichael era when Lance Armstrong was a junior. Those were fun times. And then I did my doctoral studies at the University of Wyoming, again in physiology, focusing on exercise endocrinology. So it's really interested in how fatigue manifests itself. And during that time, I got to do some projects at Colorado Springs with the track cycling program, the National Track Cycling Program. From there, I left and I went to Australia as a research scientist, sports scientist, working at the Australian Institute of Sport. I was there for 21 years. And after the 2000 Olympic Games, I took over as the sports science coordinator nationally for cycling. So I had a remit over the road cyclists, mountain bike cyclists, BMXers, and all the track cycling programs. A lot of my doctoral students were really focused on the frontline service delivery. Then I came out, met you. I was charmed by you, Jesse, in the interview process and couldn't say no. And off to Philadelphia for 4 years and really focused more on team sport with you. Of course, it's all team sport, intermittent, high intensity type activities. And then from there, came over for an interesting opportunity. I'm working now at it's like a concierge health and wellness center. They're really interested in wearable technologies and software that can help people live long, healthy lives. So that's kind of the run all the way up to here. But I still stay in touch with folks at USA Cycling. Still, there's a lot of cyclists in the local Bay Area. They'll find out my background and pop in. And I still keep in touch with some of the Australian cycling coaches as well.
Yeah, amazing and accomplished career for sure. And just for our viewers today, as you led to, we got together and we got a chance to work together with the Philadelphia 76ers, worked under your direction, advancing all things sports science for that team. Just a bit about my background. And prior to that, I spent 14 years total with the team. And prior to that, I was the head strength and conditioning coach for that team for the 76ers for 9 years, and then did some strength and conditioning roles in Division One universities. Worked in the NFL for a stint, had a season over in NFL Europe, and did some stuff with other football teams as well early in my career. So just a bit about how we connected and why we're here talking about thermoregulation.
And probably don't forget, Jesse, you went through those last 2 years there with the Sixers. You went through that the Australia Catholic University runs that internet that high performance master's program, and you're one of the very proud graduates of that program. And I thought you did a great job, and also you connected strongly to a lot of my old colleagues from the Australian
Mhm.
Institute of Sport.
Yeah, absolutely. That was an incredible program and got a chance to obviously learn directly from a lot of the researchers that I had read for a lot of years, and again, colleagues of yours from the Australian Institute. And yeah, that what a wonderful experience that was. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So we're going to jump right in.
Okay.
Powerful right off the bat, sort of how can this help me type question, and then we'll get into like a lot of background in science and
Yeah.
research. So sort of an inverted funnel approach, maybe a Seinfeld reverse episode. But I want to go right in on if I am an endurance cyclist, a sprint cyclist, and I am considering a technological ergogenic, like palmar cooling, right? Something like CoolMitt, how would something help my training or help my race day? How would a technology help me the most? What is it? What am I getting out of this?
Yeah, so what I usually tell, and spoken very much like an athlete who they come in a little bit close, their body posture is quite dismissive, and it's the question you always get is, what can you do for me? You
Hmm.
know, convince me that you've got something that will help me because I'm pretty good. You know, usually the
Hmm.
ones you're talking to, they're already insanely accomplished, so they're looking at you like, what could you do to help? I usually tell people that, hey, if you're going to compete in an event and it's warm, especially you said both sprint and endurance, so you lump both of those together. I'll say that if I know how much power you can produce for 5 minutes, and you only have 5 minutes, say, to do an interval, then you could use palmar cooling and increase the amount of power you produce for 5 minutes. So for a given time, you can increase the power, especially when it's like 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, which is very common for workouts, but also common for events like a team, like a pursuit, you know, or in the old days, a kilo. The other thing I'll tell them that if you have a set pace, like a bunch of people are going up a hill, and it's a hot hill, and when people are riding, endurance athletes are riding, and they're going up a hill, they start to lose some convective cooling. And so one of the names of the game is how long can you last at the pace? There's evidence that palmar cooling can allow you to go further. So both of these work really well on ergometers because typically this technology is not portable. So you ask, how does it help? Can palmar cooling help? Yes, it can. There's strong evidence. We've seen it over the last 20 years of research. And what are the things you usually get out of it? You usually get out of it that one, for a given period of time, you can produce more power as a cyclist. Two, for a given power output, you can last a little bit longer. And three, if there's shorter high intensity intervals, the decay that you'll often get, say you were doing like a 30-second interval or a 1 minute interval, there's evidence that if you do repeat intervals, like 1 minute on, 1 minute off, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, that the decay will be less. So there's probably three different aspects of performance where there's evidence that palmar cooling can help. More power for a given time, more time for a given power, and more high intensity intervals for a fixed work relief ratio. And all of those, of course, have relevance to building up the kind of fitness you want to perform better.
Yeah, absolutely. All three of them difference makers in their own right, for sure,
Yeah, yeah.
with respect to both training and race day. You mentioned the evidence and the research behind it. Can you give our listeners just a little bit of background on the science of thermoregulation, controlling, mitigating heat accumulation during workouts and
Yeah,
the course of a race
yeah.
and everything? Yep.
That's a good one. And look, I was really fortunate when I came to the Australian Institute of Sport. It was 94. And this is for all the old timers. There were the Olympic Games way back in 1996. They were in Atlanta, Georgia. And so it was hot. And so the first thing that I came into when I became a sports scientist at the AIS was, what can you do for the cycling team? Because they're going to Atlanta and it's going to be hot. And one of the things we asked the question was, are there some people that are really susceptible to the heat, and there are other people that are not susceptible to the heat? And so we did a study, And we basically had people do 30-minute time trials in cool conditions and in hot conditions. And what we wanted to do is see the people that really struggled with the heat because we thought they might need more heat acclimation or acclimatization. And what we found was everybody, it was impacted by the heat. And so the take-home message is we typically, the human body core temperature, it's usually around 37 degrees Celsius, can vary a little bit, zero point 0.2 up, zero point 0.2 down. That's about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's where the body tends to work really well. If you can warm the muscles up with a normal core temperature, you're usually going to start seeing performance capabilities that meet your capabilities. But if core temperature increases, and this happens with warm up and workouts and hot conditions and hot humid conditions where you can't dissipate the heat, then your body temperature can get up to around 41 degrees Celsius, usually where the literature says you're getting into a danger zone from 37 to 41 degrees Celsius. I think that's like 104, 105 degrees Fahrenheit. That's really hot. Then what happens is the way muscle works, there's a bunch of enzymes that are working, there's a bunch of chemical reactions within the muscle, and you start to impact in a negative way the ability of the muscle to generate force. And so it's obligatory as a word used in science. It hits everybody. We would have people, they'd say in Queensland, they're from Queensland, which is up north in Australia, and they're like, mate, I love the heat. I perform so well in the heat. And it's a big fallacy. It's a lie. Everybody in hot conditions, you can look at world records. They're all lower in hot conditions. Now, some people fall off more than others, but you asked the question, let's just go through the basic, physiology. And I'm telling you, one, we say a bunch of national team cyclists, they exercise really hard, they get hot a lot, so they're pretty heat acclimated. And when we put them in hot conditions, all of them perform worse in hot conditions than they do in cool conditions. And that's power output over 30 minutes. And I'm also telling you that there's good science behind how muscles contract all the way to the point of actin and myosin filaments and sarcomeres and all the muscle, physiology. Those processes are impaired when that tissue gets really, really warm. So that's what makes everybody so interested in, well, what can I do about it? And in the old days, it was like probably not much.
Mm.
Go sit in the shade, go put your feet in the stream. That's what they do in the Tour de France on hot days. They go to a fountain in Italy and you'd see all the guys before the start of the race trying to put their feet in the fountain. Or some people would there's great stuff. They'd take a cabbage leaf with like a cold cabbage leaf from the refrigerator, put it on their head, put the helmet over a cabbage leaf so they had cold water on their head to try to help with evaporative cooling. But those were the old days. Today, there's technology that can really help move heat away from the body much, much more effectively. And it's a great area of research. We tend to always see most strategies that augment or help heat dissipation help.
Right. So what I heard there, and this is always a good reminder for me, going back to physiology textbooks from undergrad, heat is a big limiting factor with performance, the accumulation of heat, whether we're talking local musculature in the gym or a weight room setting with a set to failure, momentary muscular failure, or power
Yeah.
decrement drop off again in a sprint interval or something. A lot of times people think carbohydrate availability. A lot of times people think hydration, but heat is a huge contributing factor to when we get tired.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the warmer the environment is, the more important heat dissipation mechanisms really are. So in cool conditions, the body gets really, really hot. It just takes longer for it to get there if you're doing intense work. But in hot conditions, heat dissipation requires a gradient. So if it's cool outside and your body's hot, the heat moves from high temperatures to low temperatures easy. But man, when it's hot outside and there's not much of a differential, you're in big trouble. And the other thing is humidity. So the ability for sweat to evaporate off the surface of the skin, it pulls a lot of energy with it. So evaporative heat loss is a powerful, powerful source of heat dissipation. But if it's humid outside, then that doesn't really work very well as well. And then probably this leads us to another really interesting concept because there's things that feel good, but they actually aren't good, and that's a danger. So you can go, you can go find something that feels cool, like you might feel like there's a maybe something like a just the floor, or you might pick up some ice like in a bag and just put it on your skin,
A lot
and
of
it
people use those misting
yeah
fans or,
yeah
again, sort of cold towel over my neck or something,
You'll
right?
see,
Yeah.
yeah, tons of stuff that really feels good.
Mhm.
And the risk with many of these approaches is that look, it's good to feel good without a doubt. But often, what can happen for any kind of cooling that's like solid, like if you're using ice in particular, or sometimes there's these phase change polymers where they're like it's like a gel that you put on you
Mhm.
and it feels good. It's cool. It comes right out of the fridge. But what happens is you can build up a boundary layer, is what it's known as. And essentially, your skin will warm up the surface of the cool material. And there's a very thin layer where the material that you put on your skin, it's actually warm where you're putting it on your skin, and it's cool behind it. So it's like a sandwich. And
Mhm.
so it felt cool when you first put it on, but then it loses its ability to pull heat from your body very, very, very quickly. And then the other thing is, fans, with mist to try to add to evaporative cooling, water baths. We did a lot of research on slushies, trying to get basically when ice turns to water, there's something known as latent heat diffusion. And so there's energy required to go from a phase change from ice to liquid. And so it helps pull heat. It requires heat. It's a heat sink. So you can put slushies, in your belly. You can have fans with mist blowing over the top of you. You can
And would you
have
categorize the cooling vests now too? Those are popular, correct?
cooling vest.
Put a
Yep, you
whole
can
vest
put,
around with the idea that maybe you could
yeah.
decrease your core temperature by putting a vest right, literally, on your core.
That's
Yep.
that's right. We ended up finding before the '96 games, we were looking for areas to warm up, and I found a Catholic church, and I went in, and probably been a while since I've been in a Catholic church, so I went in with confidence, and I told them I was with the Australian national team, and I loved how cool it was and quiet in the church, and I told the father there that the priest that the Olympics were coming up. He was super excited. And I said, is there any way he probably wondered if the team was going to come in and pray. I wanted him to come in and lay on the stone surfaces on the bottom so that they could just feel colder temperatures. That's called conduction, where there's direct contact. And so we had people come in and lay on the stone. It was real nice and quiet and really good way to stay cool. The trick with all of these is that they tend to be logistically complex, a lot of these things. So they don't travel with you very well. Some of these
Yep.
things are a pain in the butt. The slushy makers, I've traveled with those. The big fans of community travel with those. Those are a pain. One of the advantages of the palm cooling is, with devices like CoolMitt that we're both very, very familiar with now. This is kind of ingenious because it travels with you. So it's a heat sink, and it pulls heat from you in a way that you don't necessarily adapt to quickly or accommodate quickly. So it's done in a way that's very subtle, and it just keeps pulling heat. So your body doesn't build up a resistance to it. It just keeps pulling heat. For a lot of these other things, if you put ice on your skin, you're going to vasoconstrict. If you gulp down a bunch of ice, there will be changes in blood flow to your gut. There's a lot of physiology that gets a little bit nuanced with many different types of cooling devices. The one thing with Palmer cooling that I've found really exciting is, I mean, when you get the right temperature, not too hot, not too cold, just the right temperature gradient between the palm of the hand and the device, then you are just wicking heat away as blood flows through your hand. You're just pulling heat constantly from it, and it's not like the hand's going to turn off the blood flow or that you're going to accommodate it just keeps pulling heat off, which is a
Yeah.
really nice either adjunct to other protocols, or it can be just used alone.
Yeah. We keep talking about Palmer. We hopped over sort
Oh
of
yeah, we
sort of an
yeah
point really. Why the hand? Can we do this anywhere?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. There's these anastomoses, there's this hairless skin on the palm of our hands and also on the soles of our feet. And researchers from Stanford, I mean, Gron Heller, who you both know well, I've had a chance to get to know better since my time over here in the Bay Area. They've studied the way that these hairless surfaces have been used from an evolutionary sense in mammals. They've been used for thermal regulation across many different species. And what that means is that you can move blood to the palm of your hands, and you can do so not because you're feeding oxygen needing tissue in your hands. You're actually feeding blood flow to your hands, and it just flows through a rich network of arterioles so that it's close to the skin, and it helps you dissipate heat from the palms of your hands. So you can enhance that by touching something that's cooler than your body temperature. It even pulls more heat. And this is a really interesting finding that mammals can thermoregulate by moving blood to certain regions of the body where the blood is close to the skin, and it allows for a really nice heat exchange. So um, what Craig Heller did at Stanford University is he wondered if he could capitalize on that really unique physiology and put a cool surface. This could be done with water, or it could be done with some type of a material that interfaces with the palm of the hand. And he keeps that surface cool by circulating cool water through it, and whether he could pull more heat from the body. And he showed, yes, indeed, you can. If you make the surface too cold, the vessels in the hand they'll vasoconstrict, and so then you'll lose heat exchange. And if it's too warm, then the heat gradient's not too much.
Mhm.
So those studies are real classic, and they were happening way back in the 90s, and we had heard about them in Australia. I'd heard about this special secret Stanford research, but we couldn't find it published, and it was just like a rumor mill. And we're like, damn it, the Americans have something we don't. We weren't quite sure what they were doing, but we knew it came from Stanford, and we knew Craig Heller was a genius. So we were very, very curious. So it was really funny for me, full circle, years later. Um, I get to meet Craig Guile, CEO, founder of CoolMitt, who's capitalizing on this technology, and he's got all these buddies from the military, and they're doing all these really cool, kind of concept to product projects. And I get to see this thing called CoolMitt, and I was like, "Ha,
Mhm.
that was it. That's what he was working on."
Yeah,
And so those devices are made specifically to take the guesswork out of this really unique physiology of moving heat away from the body through the palms of the hand. That's known as palmar cooling. And look,
yeah,
it's not just Stanford now. Researchers from all around the world are studying palmar cooling and its efficacy and efficiency.
sure. Sure. I want to focus on one sort of point that you brought up there, that I think is really important. So, with palmar cooling, thermoregulation through the palm, we're actually looking to avoid vasoconstriction, right? A
Yes.
lot of people seek out, again, conventional strategies. You ice down your knees, you ice down an inflamed area to encourage vasoconstriction, maybe a cold water immersion, something like that.
Yeah.
We're not looking to do that with
Yeah.
palmar cooling, correct?
That is so correct. And
Yep.
um, and that's probably, again, we talked about this a little earlier. Sometimes what feels good is not good. And I'll tell you specifically for cyclists, we did a study with cooling jackets. And just as a little point of pride, this is before Nike came out with their cooling jacket. So this is years before Nike had a cooling jacket. We had our own cooling jackets, and we would put ice in them. And we were doing some studies to look at how effective is an ice jacket for improving a cyclist's time trial performance in the heat. So we had
Mhm.
national team cyclists in a heat chamber. And what we would do is during their warm up, they would use a cooling vest, like an ice vest, or they wouldn't. So it was a repeated measures design. One time they come in, do their normal warm up, and they ride for 30 minutes in the heat. The other one, they come in during their warm up, they use a cooling vest. The cyclists want their muscles warm. Everybody knows it feels really bad to just right out of the start ride hard. You like your muscles to be warm and fluid and supple and get your pedal stroke down. So warm muscles are okay. And that's why the warm-ups are good. You just don't want a hot muscle, and you definitely don't want high core temperature. So we were using the cooling vest to try to offset the heat gain.
Hmm.
Um, and it felt cool. They were like, "Oh, I'm gonna knock it out of the park on this one." That's what they thought. And what we found was very disturbing because we were promoting cooling vests and cooling jackets as something that could really help. And for the first trials, what we found was a very profound mispacing. So for 30 minutes, a cyclist will learn how to pace themselves. They go out hard, they settle into a rhythm, they know when they're almost home, they build it up and they give everything they got. So that's a pacing profile. And with different types of terrain, pacing profiles change a bit with hills and downhills. So this is just in the lab on an ergometer, so it should be pretty easy to pace. But what they did is they felt cool, and but we actually had these rectal thermometers, up the backside, 10 centimeters. That's how you measure this stuff. Plus, we had all the skin thermistors on. And what we were really surprised at is there wasn't a lot of change in core temperature. And we're like, how could this be? And then we looked at their performances, and in 2 out of 3, I think we had 12 cyclists. Essentially, we've got about 8 of the 12 cyclists who are having worse performances with the cooling vest
Wow.
than they did without. And we're like, how the hell is that possible? And then we looked at the pacing profile, and what had happened to them is they felt good because it feels nice and cool, but they weren't cool. They didn't move a lot of heat because we talked about that boundary layer. It basically didn't set up a very big heat gradient for them. It also shut down when you put ice on your skin. It shuts down on evaporative cooling. It blocks sweating, and so
Hmm.
they were losing the evaporative cooling. And so then they take off on this time trial and they go out really hard for about 5 minutes, and then they struggle for another five. And then it's just a 20-minute slugfest, brutal, torture chamber for 20
Hmm.
minutes in the heat, and they end up performing worse. So our take home
Oh,
message was if you want to use a cool vest, you got to be very careful to familiarize people to it. And we kind of lost some of our excitement for cool vests. We're not saying you can't use them, but you got to be really careful how you do use them. And it started to make us want to look for other avenues of heat exchange.
got it. Got it. So we want to avoid the boundary layer without a doubt. That's a big part of it. And the heat extraction can be magnified if you focus on these avian anastomoses, right? The parts of your body that have the
Yes.
glabrous portions of the
Yeah.
skin, which is obviously there's only 3 of them in the body, the hairless portions of the face, the palms, and the soles of the feet. So those are
Yes.
pretty powerful, practical application thoughts
They,
as it relates to mitigating heat during your
and
workouts. Yeah.
I would tell you, just as one follow-up for that boundary layer, watch an athlete. They know what's going on because they'll say, I want another ice bag, or they'll change the ice bag, they'll flip it over. Or if they're wearing a cooling
Hmm.
vest, they'll say, I want you to get me one that's recharged, bring me another one. Even though the vest still seems cool, they're like, it's lost its oomph.
Hmm.
So
Right. And
yeah,
anyone that's been in a cold tub or dropped a swollen ankle into an ice bath knows as soon as you swirl that around or you move a little bit, immediately that sensation is re-engaged where it feels cold again, right?
that's right.
You've disturbed the boundary layer that developed, if you were
Yeah.
still, yeah. Super interesting. So in your study, you talked about the vest as almost like a pre-cooling option. Are there other ways if someone did want to pre-cool, maybe between warm up and the start of a race or in the lead up to any activities surrounding a race? Are there other ways that you could potentially do that, but do it effectively?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Jesse. I don't want to mislead anyone that's listening to us. It's not like the Australian sports scientists were saying pre-cooling isn't effective. Pre-cooling is effective. It's just that pre-cooling with a heat, with a cool vest, the ones that we had designed, didn't necessarily give us a big bang for the buck. So the traditional studies on pre-cooling are usually done with a cold water plunge, where they actually put people in cold water, and that can be anywhere from like, 8 to 10 minutes at around 14, 15 degrees Celsius. And then what they'll do is they'll have a little dip in core temperature by about zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.3 degrees Celsius. And that's been done. There's some really classic studies that show that pre-cooling leading into the warm up, you still have a heat rise through the warm up, but you've offset it. So the muscles are warm, but when you finish your warm up, your core temperature is cooler. So that has been shown to be effective in enhancing power output in the heat. The
Hmm.
problem is where you're traveling to races, and you can't always find that. You can't go to a river and be like, damn, this river's too cold and that river's too hot. And this fountain said, well, where are you going to do it? It makes it really, really difficult. Cold showers, some people will do that to try to cool themselves down. But then it's a real mix of finding the right water and the right amount of time under the water. So other things that have been used is to try to pre-cool with a slushy, like where you ingest this ice slurry, like 500, milliliters of an ice slurry. It can drop your temperatures down. And I've done some studies, even with you, you've got a young son, and there's nothing like watching a little tiny 5-year-old who's kind of skinny power through a big bowl of ice cream. And it's classic. At the end, they're like, God, I'm freezing. It was good, but I'm freezing. And it's true. You just put all this essentially like ice in your belly, and it's a heat sink. The problem for athletes is you got to pee that all out. You got to get rid of all the warm urine to like move the heat, out of the body. So you're always looking at the timing. So the fans can be nice with the mists for trying to help augment, especially for warm up when you're not moving, you have no convective airflow. Um, but yeah, a bit of a game changer is like palm cooling,
Hmm.
because what you can do is you can create an extra heat sink. So while you're warming up your muscles, your core temperature will go up a little bit, but you mitigate or you decrease the rise in core temperature. So you go through and familiarize your muscles with what they need to do, to get ready for the demands of the course. But instead of leaving at like 38 and a half degrees Celsius core temperature, you leave at like 38. So you
Yep.
use the palm cooling to offset the heat gain. And that's a very effective strategy.
Got it. Got it. Really, really good lead in to sort of the next direction that I would love to go, right? We just hit on the silence or the science of it brilliantly, very eloquently. In terms of practical application, right? You just mentioned one right there on a race day, pre-cooling strategy. But again, if I'm an endurance cyclist and I want to use Palmer cooling, I want to start implementing Palmer cooling into my training routine.
Yeah.
Think best practice to prepare for, long race. Cyclists spend so much time on ergometers, so the practicality seems to fit, right? You have this little device, your Palmer cooling right next to the bike. What are some of the ways that an athlete would build in this device into their training as it relates to endurance cycling?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways. And typically the for some people, if they're in a basement or they're wherever their partner, their wife lets them put their trainer, or their sometimes people get stuck in areas that aren't very well ventilated and are in the summer months are pretty hot, and it might be late at night and they can't ride, or there's a lot of traffic and they just want to get their workout done really quickly. If you're exercising in any hot environment, to have Palmer cooling just sitting right beside you, like you said, on a table, you can just use it for any workout, really,
Mhm.
and it will just help you alleviate some sensations of thermal stress. So that's an easy one. But I usually would recommend for people, because you got to set it up and everything and get it ready, that the again, the biggest bang for the buck, or some of the more powerful influences, will likely come when you're dealing with intensity. So
Mhm.
a lot of endurance cyclists, they are trying to train and prepare themselves for the hills. A lot of people, if you're in road racing, you're going to get dropped on the hills. That's going to kill you. The mountain bikers, you're going to get dropped on the hills. So cyclists will typically do these workouts where they do like a 10-minute interval on 4 repeat 10 minutes at like threshold. Or they'll do something like a 20-minute interval with a crescendo. So pace into it just below threshold for 10, work at 10, and then finish above 10. So you kind of do like a 30-minute, or you do like a 5-minute below threshold, 10-minute at threshold, another 5 minutes above threshold.
Yep.
Those are particularly useful, especially if you're on an ergometer for like the CoolMitt, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to overload your muscles. And you don't want your brain to quit before your muscles get overloaded. So if you can do anything like a little swig of a nice drink that's cool and flavorful and citrusy and it motivates you, anything that motivates you. Some people will put an ergometer, like get a friend right beside them. We do that a lot to do these intervals in pairs. We do some workouts where we'd put 8 cyclists all together in ergometers to try to motivate themselves to go harder.
Hmm.
The CoolMint it seems to provide a nice sensation to help people dig a little bit deeper, which is going to drive the stimulus a little bit harder to try to promote the adaptations they're looking for. So you can do it for the hill climbing. You can also do it for any interval sets. You know, I've seen people use
Hmm.
it for like Tabatas, people using it for 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, and people doing the classic, people call it the Norwegian set now, but people are doing 4-minute intervals long before the Norwegians were doing them.
Hmm.
So any type of interval set, you can
Yep.
do it continuously while you do all the intervals. Or for some people, they like to grab one of the handlebars and really work it. And so they just put their hand into the CoolMitt during the recovery phases of the interval sets.
Yep.
So to recap, how could you use it during training? Anytime it's warm, it can be useful. But remember, even when it's cool, your body gets really hot. So you can just use it kind of like ad libitum, which means whenever it feels like you want to use it to help you
Mhm.
feel better. Or you can use it for your hill intervals, or you can use it for the shorter high intensity repeat intervals. You can use it continuously, or you can use it just during the recovery phases.
Yeah. Cyclists have a unique opportunity for palmar cooling, much different than ground-based athletes, right?
Yes.
Because they train so much on a stationary item, you're not moving away, you're not running or anything. So
Yeah,
again, to highlight one thing that you mentioned there, that there are plenty of cyclists that actually just ride with their hand inside the mitt the entire time.
that's right. Yeah,
Or the other way is, again, if you want to go hard and you need both hands on the bars, you could easily cool in between your interval rests and you're building it
yeah.
in work relief.
That's right. And if you
Yeah.
go on, I've seen a couple, YouTube videos of people, cyclists using, the CoolMitt, and
Hmm.
that they usually have it set up right beside the bicycle. And, cyclists, they know their watts
Yep.
everybody's talking about their 4-minute MMPs and what your threshold power. And they know like how much power they can hold for 2 minutes or 5 minutes in watts and in watts per kg. So,
Hmm.
you get to that point where you just can't do an interval at set and get any more power, and you're looking for things that might be a little bit of a plateau breaker. And
Hmm.
so they're anecdotes, but they're individuals. It's not placebo controlled, but they try the CoolMitt and they're like, "Damn, I just put a minute 25 on my 5-minute power," and
Hmm.
they're really
Yeah.
excited by it. So
Yeah. I, I
something's going
actually,
on.
I would love your thoughts on this because I actually have one of the testimonials that they gave us ahead of, right? So specifically
Yes.
almost to what you just said, right? So cyclist wrote in, has a routine where has a set of standardized RPM and wattage and
Yeah.
goes to failure on a set. Before CoolMitt was never able to break 4 minutes.
Yeah.
While using CoolMitt, same exact routine, now has extended it to 5 minutes 53, added a minute 53 seconds onto a set to failure.
Yeah.
How is that explained? Like
It,
how would the
it,
science explain that?
there's probably two things going on. So we talked about some of the thermodynamics and muscle physiology. I probably didn't go through this really clear, but the energy that you access when you ride a bicycle, the final kind of chemical form of energy that we learn about, in undergraduate biology is adenosine triphosphate. It's this energy source. It's a chemical energy source. When you break it down so the muscles can engage and you can produce force or generate power, 80% of that reaction is given off in heat, and only 20-25% is really used and harnessed for work. So there's just tons of heat buildup. And so we know that, as we said before, if you get too hot, it's like the biochemical machinery of the muscle starts to break down and not work efficiently. So
Hmm.
one way to explain it, he said, how do you explain this? This guy said, I can't get past 4 minutes. And then he puts on CoolMitt and he goes through 4 minutes, 4:30, 5 minutes, 5:30.
That's, I mean,
Yeah,
almost out of
he's like,
2 minutes to a set to
yeah,
failure.
that's
Yeah,
huge. So,
yeah.
what he could be doing is he could be giving signals to the brain that say we are cool and it's okay to keep going. So it's like central limitations have been unbraked. But the other is that the temperature of the blood that's circulating through those muscles is cooler and it's helping him resist a thermal load. And then there's a third thing, and I'll take it when we can get it. Some people think placebo is a bad word. In
Mhm.
lectures and presentations I give, I don't even use placebo. I talk about belief effects because
Mhm.
certainly, and Ted Lasso's made it all famous now. I was doing belief effect talks way before Ted Lasso.
I'll tell you what, of the volumes of information I've learned from you over the years,
Yeah,
the belief effect stuff is, I think, some of the most
it,
powerful. It's amazing. It really
it's
is. Yeah.
huge. And if you unwrap your cool mitt and you've heard the testimonials and you listen to Jess and Dave tell you about thermodynamics and you know it works. And you've probably been, not saying you've been a little bit, easy on yourself. But, if you're training by yourself, it's hard to push yourself. What you need sometimes is a younger brother, to just really
Mhm.
stick into it. Or you
Yeah.
need a coach right there motivating you. And if the cool mitt gives you the motivation that when you use it, it makes sense. And you're like, I should be able to go further. And then you're getting signals to your brain that go, I think you can go further. And then you're moving heat from your body that allows the muscles to go further. Then you go further. So
Mhm.
that's how I would explain it.
Yeah.
And then
Wow.
I'd always check the power. A great way for somebody to go further to give them power is they didn't calibrate their power meter. So that's the other one you always want to check. Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely want to standardize your equipment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Calibration. Okay, so for a cyclist like this, right, the testimonial gentleman that we just talked about, what are the long-term training adaptations? Like, clearly, if you're going to extend the amount of time on a bike in an interval to failure, or if
Mm.
you are going to, improve your speed in any known set distance, or any, what are the long-term training adaptations?
It's a great question, and that is the name of the game is to get as much high quality training as you possibly can. So it's a stimulus response curve. So we do all kinds of things in cycling to try to overload the muscles in relevant ways. I mean, one really interesting interval set is you take one leg out of you actually don't use one leg, you do single leg cycling. And the
Mhm.
idea is all of the blood that you have and all the neural drive that you can produce, it all goes to that one muscle. And the idea is to work that muscle as hard as you can and to do that frequently so that you can essentially overload the muscles in unique and novel ways to promote unique and novel adaptations. So back to this testimonial, if somebody is riding at a given power output for 4 minutes, that's all they've got. And let's say they do that 3 times, they've accumulated 12 minutes. And that's the stimulus. But if they're using the CoolMitt and they can go out to 6 minutes, now 6 times 3 18. So, they've just enhanced the stimulus on those muscles in a relevant way to make those muscles more fatigue resistant. So the name of the game is to get as much high quality work as you possibly can without destroying yourself or injuring yourself. That's the name of the game.
Yeah.
Um, you know, even in individuals that have done all kinds of things, there's stories about people that have, used, EPO, which is illegal and not advised whatsoever, but they've been boosted by extra blood and it's allowed them to train harder. And then even when they're not on EPO, they've offset their fitness levels to a higher level. So you could test them. They're not on EPO, but they had a block where they were, and that helped set them up. So
Mhm.
um, this is the idea with the CoolMitt is that you can do more high quality work. It's taking the heat, so the heat gain happening rapidly over 4 minutes, it's slowing down the heat gain. So it's starting to happen over 6 minutes. So that gives you more time under high quality. The same thing, we haven't talked about this, Jesse, much, but although a lot of cyclists spend most of their time on their bike, almost all cyclists now recognize the benefits of resistance training, getting in the weight room. And we haven't
Mhm.
talked about that a lot, but there's some really compelling evidence that by using the CoolMitt in between sets, people can do more pull-ups or they can do more reps at a high load for like a leg press. And then all of this is to try again to add high quality workouts to the week. More high quality
Mhm.
workouts to the week, more stimulus for adaptation.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense for sure. So that's sort of use within a workout.
Mm,
Now all of a sudden the recovery element's so super
yeah,
important. Once you're through your workout, obviously we want to return to homeostasis. We want to drop core temperature. A lot of people look at heart rate recovery. Obviously, that's a very, very powerful metric. How could post-activity cooling help all that? You're done with your bike, you could just get off the road, you're in the van after a stage, something like that. You
yeah.
throw your hand, you want to implement palmar cooling. How does that work?
Yeah, so when you finish a vigorous, high intensity, prolonged high intensity exercise session, especially if it's in the heat, you're going to finish with an elevated core temperature. And so, recovery science, the science of how you recover, there's usually two phases of recovery. The first phase is to try to get you back to a status quo. So your body is outside of kind of a homeostatic range, which means that we like to operate not too hot, not too cold. We like to be right at that 98, 97 degrees. And so if we're too hot, the body will do everything it can to cool itself down. If we're too cold, we'll shiver and try to warm it back up. And that takes precedence. So we're not going to be focusing, the body won't be focusing on trying to recompartmentalize fluid because you're dehydrated. It's not going to focus on glycogen storage. It's not going to be focusing on anabolic events with myofibular protein turnover, all the things that are adaptations that let you reach a new level in your performance ability. Those are not happening until you get rid of this kind of trauma, this kind of state that is non-desirable. So, if you are working out with any kind of frequency, one of the tricks that we all know, I mean, that was our lives, wasn't it? You did such a good job in the recovery center for all the basketball players in the NBA playing 82 games. Sometimes it's four, back to backs. That's quick turnaround. 4 games in a week. That's a quick turnaround. Lots of travel. The name
Mhm.
of the game is to recover as quickly as possible. You want the body in adaptation mode, not in an acute recovery mode, which would dominate the equation. So a lot of words there, but it basically is like the quicker you can get your core temperature back down to normal, the sooner you're going to start going through adaptive processes versus these kind of regulatory processes. So you finish the race. Why cook in your own body heat for 2 hours? Why not actively wick that heat away, get back to normal, let your body start adapting?
Got it. Got it. And of course, we know the king of all recovery modalities is sleep, right? If you're
Yeah.
getting your sleep and if you're getting your nutrition correctly, you're generally ticking the
Mm.
two biggest boxes with respect to performance recovery. Any thoughts? I know there's not really strong research here, but any thoughts on
Yeah.
how Palmer cooling, thermoregulation in the lead up to sleep? Any thoughts there on how it could potentially help at night?
Yeah, I do have some thoughts. And I've talked to Professor, Shona Halson, who
Hmm.
is Australia Catholic University faculty and real does some great work in sleep research. I've spoken to her about it. Definitely spoken to, Craig and the folks at CoolMitt. Before you fall asleep, one of the really powerful triggers that allows you to actually move into sleep is a slight dip in your core temperature. And that's kind of how melatonin works. Funny enough, one of the effects of melatonin is some vasodilation upstream from all of these vessels that we talked about in the palms of in your palms and in the soles of your feet. And so you start to allow more blood to move through your palms to try to let heat move from the body. And as your core temperature comes down, there's a lot of feedback with all the neurophysiology that allows you to slip off into sleep. And that lower core temperature seems to be very conducive to slow wave sleep, which is generative sleep, really regenerative
Mhm.
sleep. A lot of hormones are happening there, and that's thought to be. And most of your slow wave sleep, it really clusters. You only get about an hour of it a night, and sometimes a
Mhm.
bit more. And it kind of clusters in the early stages of the evening. Um, if you are hot, sleep latency increases. So it's harder to fall asleep when you're hot. We all know that. There are
Mhm.
devices now that have been produced that try to, smart beds, which again, really difficult to travel with a smart bed, but
Mhm.
beds that try to regulate your temperature. And so there's a big push of trying to come up with ways to decrease your body temperature just subtly before you go to sleep. Now, this is pure speculation, but if Team USA Cycling is hearing about this as an area to try to get ahead of the rest of the world, I think, and I would love to see some research in this space. I think that before you go to bed, you could use, it might even be 15 minutes, 20 minutes of palmar cooling to help drop the core temperature. And I suspect that in some individuals, especially those that are struggling to fall asleep, sometimes if you do a workout late in the day,
Mhm.
you get a residual in your core temperature. I think it could have some use cases that are very effective. I also think this probably has nothing to do with Cycling USA, but at my stage of my life, I've experienced a partner who's gone through menopause. And,
Yeah.
they're cooking, man. Talk about they are cooking. So I've always thought this is a whole different use model, and I should use a CoolMitt beside her because I think she's radiating heat onto me. So I think there is some really interesting sleep physiology to consider, but I think you're right. This is kind of the frontier of kind of next steps of where palmar cooling could go.
Sure. And you could see something like this, most of the really good interventions focus on sleep hygiene, right? And
Yes.
what is your sleep environment as you lay down and as you prep your body to be able to fall
Yeah.
asleep, stay asleep, whether you're talking mindfulness, meditation, sleep in a dark cave, set the curtains, you could see something like a device, a
Yeah.
cooling as almost like a relaxation, almost like a value add to that pre-sleep routine to maximize that overnight.
I
Yeah.
I totally agree. And
Yeah.
then, like you said, sleep is so habitual that if you try something and you get a good night's sleep, then it starts to build up a reinforcement cycle. And it's almost like a conditioning effect, this like operant conditioning, like Pavlov's dogs type stuff. Like,
Hmm.
every time you put your hand in, you start to feel sleepy, and so you start to
Yep.
get this little routine going that helps. And it's easier than the shower, and you can take it with you to hotel rooms. Yeah.
Yep. Makes sense.
There was
Makes
one
sense. Got
thing
it. Yeah.
we didn't. I don't know why I thought of it right now. I was just thinking of hotels and travel around with basketball players and stuff. And one thing we didn't talk about, which is really interesting for the for athletes, sprint cyclists and BMXers, they'll use gloves. They usually use gloves when they're riding. But some don't. They use it more for protection. They'll have like almost like a
Okay.
golfer's glove.
Yep.
But one thing that does happen with palmar cooling is kind of like a bowler or basketball. The great LeBron James grab the talcum powder, dry your
Mhm.
hands out so you have a good feel for the ball and everything. Some
Yep.
people find it really just uncomfortable. The hands are just sweating. They're just sweating so much, and just to grab onto the bicycle handlebars and to get a good secure purchase, it just feels like they're just slippery and wet. So one thing with palmar cooling is it does change the sweating that occurs on the palm. And I know you've been at golf tournaments, and
Hmm.
the whole idea of they use gloves as well, but to have a dry hand,
Yep.
for control of the golf club. I think that's an interesting aspect we don't really talk about a lot as well, is
Hmm.
just the ways to change sweating, and possibly not just at the palm, but in the whole body. If you are sweating a lot and the sweat is just dropping onto the ground, that sweat is only dehydrating you. It is not cooling you. So
Yep.
for sweat to help cool you, it needs to evaporate. So for heavy, heavy sweaters, there might be a way to help maintain hydration by using palmar cooling to just offset some of these sweat mechanisms that are essentially excessive.
Yep. Yep. You reminded me of a story. We've gotten some from professional baseball athletic trainers that
Mm.
use palmar cooling, right, and
Yeah.
CoolMitt as a prophylactic to reduce the accumulation of sweat to get out in front of blisters and development
Oh,
with pitchers, right?
yeah.
Sort of the biggest thing that causes a blister in a pitcher
Yeah.
is sweat, the friction between the surface of the finger and the ball. So if you
Yeah.
can reduce the amount of sweat that accumulates in the hand, you can get out in front of blisters developing, which I did not know this until you start having these conversations. It's one of the
Yeah.
biggest conditions that baseball athletic trainers have to treat, right?
Yeah.
Represents a lot of man games lost and everything, like just a simple blister on the tip of a
Isn't
finger,
that
which is
amazing?
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, the equivalent for cycling is saddle sores. They're not nice,
Hmm. Yep,
and that usually comes from the chamois not having a great interface between the skin and the shorts and the bicycle seat.
yep,
So you start to speculate that if you could cut down excessive sweating, you don't want to just be sitting in a pool of sweat while you're doing all your intervals. That
sure.
cannot be good for skin health. Yeah.
Yeah. So based on what we've talked about, I mean, it sounds like Palmer cooling could be a real difference maker, right? Hesitate on the hyperbole, but game changer in terms of, again, what do you add into your training? What do you use on race day to gain a real advantage over competition? So I feel like it's definitely not a conventional strategy, and it's not as well known commercially in terms of an ergogenic if you compare it to nutritional supplementation or anything like that. Where else can it go if you like sort of forecast or look at the future of where cooling in general could go, Palmer cooling, thermoregulation strategies? What is
Mm.
next in this space?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm old enough to have seen a lot of things kind of go from science conversations to practice. And think about hydration, Jesse, you'd almost be fired as a coach if you didn't provide appropriate hydration breaks. And soigneurs that work on the grand tours, the big part of the job is to make sure all the feeding, carbohydrate feeding and hydration are done at appropriate intervals because everybody believes in it so much. It wasn't that long ago they were smoking cigarettes in the Tour de France. So
Yep.
it's funny how that all changes. Sleep recommendations are powerful now. Like even in high school, they're saying, you guys, you kids, you need your sleep. People are changing training programs so that they don't train so early so that the kids can get sleep because we believe in sleep. We know that sleep. I mean, I've come through the whole era of altitude training, where it was like a wacko science project. Now it's a given. Like everyone has an altitude camp and uses altitude blocks because we know the science. And it's really interesting. We're at a time right now where we're talking about thermoregulation like it's nuancy. And you
Hmm.
could see a future where you would be fired as a coach if you didn't have active thermoregulatory strategies embedded in your little breaks where you hydrate people. And you would be chastised as a coach or you'd be ridiculed as an athlete if you didn't take care of your thermal load post effort. Like, what kind of a slacker are you? Don't you care about this team? I think
Yeah.
you could start to see it come to that point. And the impact of being overheated on adaptation and being overheated on performance is profound. It's undeniable. So the themes are there. It's just the way we implement practices to make it all happen are still, like you said in the question, they're kind of nuanced and they're kind of in little pockets. So I think the future will be there. There's probably going to be ways the devices, you and I are privy to some of the interesting exploration and advances that are happening with CoolMitt. You're going to
Hmm.
start seeing devices that are going to be even easier to carry around with you and even easier to operate and possibly even more personalized to your particular needs. And I think that's all going to
Sure.
be really exciting into the future.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for sure. You take a concept and that makes a big impact, and then you just make it easier to use for the masses.
Yeah.
That seems like a practical and smart evolution of a product.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it starts off, isn't it, with so many of these things that the early adopters get a performance advantage, and
Hmm.
then it starts to become mainstream. And then if you're
Hmm.
not doing it, it becomes a performance disadvantage.
Hmm.
It goes the other way. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Everyone's starting to use it.
excellent. Excellent. Well, gosh, I can't. I think we over delivered in terms of what you gave to our audience on topic and on the theme of thermoregulation as it relates to the cycling world and USA cycling. David, thank you so much for all of your time and great information today.
Yeah, great to see you again.